Welcome to Jahmi Rock's Jottings, your seriously silly space to hear deep insights on music, especially reggae and samba reggae. It is my intention to share meaningful musicological arguments and observations to inspire and, frankly, pass my doctoral exams. Welcome all. I'm your host, Jahmi Rock, aka Racquel Bernard. Let's start jamming. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Jahmi Rock's Jottings. Today we are diving into theories of nationalism. You might be wondering what nationalism is and why is it at all related to gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics. First, nationalism's generic dictionary definition is identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. Second, it relates to my work because liberation or self determination can in fact be thwarted by dangerous threads of nationalism. Now, there are many nuances to what I have just said. In the United States, we are wary of white supremacist nationalism because of the evidence of harm that animates its legacies. At the same time, black nationalism was sometimes used as a way to combat white supremacist nationalism, but it has its own pitfalls if individuals and groups are not careful. From my field, gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics, especially reggae and samba reggae, theories of nationalism are important to break down and digest because the post-colonial world is a world preoccupied with creating nations or recreating nations. So, in 1962, when Jamaica became an independent nation free from the formal colonization of the UK, there was a rush to determine what Jamaica would be, what values the nation would hold, what its motto would be, and so forth. For Brazil, independence and nation building came much sooner in 1822. It first kept a monarchical, you know what I'm saying, a monarchy system, okay? Until 1889, when the military declared Brazil a republic. In the time period that interests me the most for reggae and samba reggae related Brazilian genres, 1960s to 1980s are my jam. Jamaica saw a lot of political upheaval after labor unions became political parties, and Brazil was going through a strict military dictatorship. Since nationalism and its theories are so vast, I have a heftier list of scholars to examine this time. They include Henry Louis Gates, Umut Oskarimli, Ernest Gellner, and Charles Garrett. Gellner called nationalism an inevitable part of the modern world. Gellner's book, Nationalism, was actually finalized by David Gellner, his son. His father's stories is one marked by the flight from nationalism of Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany is one example that contextualizes the generic definition, and that's the generic definition of nationalism's warning of national identification to the exclusion or detriment of others. Yet Gellner hopes in this text to give an account that is not solely focused on the dangerous strains of nationalism. I love that Ernest Gellner actually turned to an anecdote about music when critics called his theory reductive, ignoring or failing to appreciate the feelings that nationalism engenders. He would play his bohemian folk songs with his mouth organ and cry over his favorite form of music. Me too, Gellner. I get emotional about my liberation tunes in reggae and samba reggae. Heck, I would even throw in hip hop, gospel, dancehall, and R&B in there. So I lean towards representing a nuanced nationalism. I do not know exactly if I think an unholy alliance of consumerism and moderate non-territorial nationalism is what I hope for, as you did, but I can relate. For Gellner, nationalism is a political principle which maintains that similarity of culture is the basic social bond. Gellner also explains that many people living in nation states assume that nationalism is a given, when in fact, there are other forms of social organization at work in different areas around the globe. I find that distinction super important, especially as a human living in the US centric society and discourse of American universities. More to my point, however, is that nations deal with post colonial liberation via its musics. To that end, I would like to highlight the afro-bloco Muzenza's song, Brilho de Beleza. And so you know, an afro-bloco is a type of carnival-related organization tied to a local space in Salvador da Bahia in Brazil. Brilho de Beleza is a song that references Bob Marley as the king of the black race. Gal Costa and Margaret Menezes both performed versions of the carnival song. Muzenza's version is led by a male voice and mixed chorus. They sing, Adeus tão, me diga te brevi, adeus tão, eu sou Muzenza do reggae, adeus tão, me diga te brevi, adeus tão, eu sou de Muzenza do reggae. This means goodbye, no. He tells me see you soon. Goodbye, no. I am Muzenza of reggae. They continue. O negro segura a cabeça com a mão e chora, sentindo falta do rei. O negro segura a cabeça com a mão e chora, sentindo falta do rei. They're saying the black person hangs his head and cries for the loss of a king. They sing this to a samba reggae rhythm which rocks back and forth like a road march swaying in glee and excitement. Gal Costa's version spells out the connections more deeply within the verses. I'll get to that, but what I want to highlight is why nation matters within the chorus and the bridge. If Bob Marley is king over the black race, that means a black nation exists beyond actual national borders and boundaries. If his death is not final, it's not seen as final, then this song defies the physical and political constraints of the nation state itself. Indeed, Black people around the world can often identify Bob Marley even in our modern moment. His image is seen on regalia across continents. His children carry on the Marley legacy with an astute stewardship, all 11 of them. And because his union with Rita Marley was one that embraced what genetic snobs call outside children, the Marley siblings really tend to lift each other up as they climb in their distinct talents. So yes, the Black person may cry that Bob Marley died at age 36, but by Muzenza standards, this is not a forever death, but a transcendent and transnational I'll see you soon. In the Gal Costa version of the song, there's this verse. Quando ele explodiu pelo mundo, ele lançou su brilho de beleza. Bob Marley para sempre estará no coração de toda raça negra. Quando Bob Marley morreu, foi aquele chororô na Vila Rosenthal. Muzenza trazendo Jamaica, arrebentando nesse carnaval. Meaning, when he exploded across the world, he cast his beauty glow. Bob Marley will forever be in the heart of the entire Black race. When Bob Marley died, there was a cry in Villa Rosenthal. Muzenza bringing Jamaica, rocking this carnival. As I said before, Marley's death rocked Black people across the world and keeps them rocking to his beautiful music. But not only that, Black musics have been performing this kind of call and response for centuries. It's nothing new. The reggae in Samba Reggae does not only refer to reggae music from Jamaica, but reggae music in Brazil, Uruguay, and other locales. And Samba Reggae has ingredients from other places in the Caribbean too. Music, then, is a global conversation that nations might package but cannot cage. Nations can be represented by genres, but they cannot trap the genre down as it inevitably influences others. That is why I really appreciate Gellner's nuanced take on nationalism. Umut Özkarimli is a political scientist who focuses on international relations and Middle Eastern studies. In the third edition of his book, Theories of Nationalism, A Critical Introduction, he talks about the potential ways that nationalism is purportedly countervailed by trends such as various forms of transnationalism or supranationalism, and their mirror images, localism, as I trip over this word, sectarianism and multiculturalism, and competing sources of collective identity, notably religion. So, is my grouping of gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics starting to make a little bit more sense now? It is indeed sources of collective identity that make singing for freedom possible. Singing together, no matter the language. Singing transcends language in many ways. Check me out. Have you ever heard artists speak about traveling to other countries and being impressed by the audience's perfect sing-along prowess despite the language gaps? That's what I'm talking about. Even Özkarimli, in the preface and acknowledgments, talks about how draining creating the third edition of his monograph was, and notes that his mom, aunt, and cousins reached out from afar, sometimes just to sing a song. Singing truly changes things. How you sing also changes things. Hear me out. Singing the national anthem may reify nationalistic feelings, but perhaps singing the national anthem like Marvin Gaye did could engender other kinds of feelings. What do you think? Well, the famous Henry Louis Gates is an American literary critic, professor, historian, and filmmaker who serves as the Alphonse Fletcher University professor and the director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard. In his 1988 book, The Signifying Monkey, A Theory of African American Literary Criticism, he flies in the face of what reminds me of respectability politics to pinpoint two trickster figures, Isu and the Signifying Monkey. In his preface, he explains the challenge of his project, if not exactly to invent Black theory, was to locate and identify how the Black tradition had theorized about itself. That is also what I'm after in the field of gender and spirituality in post-colonial liberation musics, a discourse that refers to itself, particularly the ways reggae history and reggae sensibilities advance Black freedom. Marvin Gaye can even be seen as a playful trickster figure as he takes the national anthem and leads the audience to beginning to clap on the 2 and the 4 as he croons over the band's music that sounds nothing like the original version. Gates speaks on nationalism when he makes clear the biases in terms like canon, literary theory, or comparative literature, saying, "Let us hope that the gradual erosion of those nationalist presuppositions that are amply evident in traditional schemes of categorization of the academic study of literature will serve as a model for the abolitionist presuppositions that are amply evident in traditional schemes of categorizations of the academic study of literature. Let them serve as a model for the abolition of racist and sexist presuppositions in literature as well. Gates basically sums up my hopes for my future products and projects. That if I manage to pass my exam and sing some good tunes, I can get closer to the abolition of racism and sexism in the wider world, one liberation tune at a time. Now, hear my slight remix of Brilho de Beleza. Come with me. Come. Adeus now. Me diga te brevi, adeus now, yo sou Muzenza do regi, adeus now. Me diga te brevi, adeus now, yo sou Jahmi rock do regi. O nego segura a cabeça com mal e chora. E chora, sentindo falta do rei. A negra segura a cabeça com mão e chora. E chora, sentindo falta do reina. The queens of reggae and samba reggae are ultimate role models for me in my quest for freedom. They sing songs of liberation, songs of freedom that Bob Marley refers to at times in advance with his tune Redemption Song released in 1980. Redemption and Brilho give me a similar vibe, if I'm being honest. They both remind me of what we spoke about in the last episode about becoming free in our minds. Marley sings, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Ooh, some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book." Now, read together with Brilho de Beleza, this verse is almost a little eerie, as if Marley predicted his own death. Thankfully, Brilho de Beleza is mournful and hopeful at the same time. Marley's death catapulted his message of liberation. His songs like War has plain liberatory lyrics like, "Until the philosophy, which holds one race superior and another inferior, is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. Everywhere is war, me say war." His former bandmate, Peter Tosh, a powerhouse reggae star who even more defiantly challenged the status quo, has many tunes that attack racism and classism as well. But my project wants to shine light on the women who stood beside and sang beside these powerhouse men. Yes, indeed, leaders of new black nations, so to speak. I'd like to conclude this episode of Jahmi Rock's Jottings with a personal anecdote of how I learned about the genre of samba reggae even to begin with. I was still studying at the University of Southern California, and I was trying to find a musical connection between Jamaica and Brazil with the honorable desire to one day do research in Brazil. Research, right. A place I had not visited yet, but had heard a lot about. I was doing some Googling and learned about Axé music, which somehow led me to a list of Brazilian genres. One of them was beside a picture of a man in dreadlocks, and it said samba reggae. Still, it was not until years later when I applied to the Fulbright when I landed on my research goal of comparing reggae with samba reggae. I won that Fulbright. I'm grateful for that, even though I was not able to go to Salvador da Bahia in the end. I will always be thankful for the professors who wrote for me on this side of the Americas and on that side. It was a freedom dream deferred, if you will. Perhaps me and my family will seek out long-term study in Brazil again when the time is right. Until then, I'll be reading and jamming to Gal Costa and Marcus Menezes. To all my listeners, thank you and keep jamming. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Jahmi Rocks Jottings. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe and hop on over to my artist page to hear some music that I hope changes the world for at least one soul. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at Jahmi Rock. I look forward to sharing more musical moments with you next time. Take care and keep jamming.